Picture it. It's November of 2019. You're at the Chicago Humanities Festival with the one George R.R. Martin, and he responds to a question asking him which interview questions he would like to be asked. And he says, I do like the fact that in your questions you've discussed some things other than Game of Thrones. I love Game of Thrones. I love A Song of Ice and Fire. But I do have a long history of writing other things, and I'm very happy and proud of those things too. So let's discuss those. Welcome, dream singers. I am your germ spreader. I am the Fattest Leech. You may call me Leech. I consider myself a fan of the author George R.R. Martin as a whole, not just A Song of Ice and Fire, which means I will refer to and then compare and contrast his other stories in order to more accurately speculate on A Song of Ice and Fire. Like many other people, throughout my geekdom life, once A Song of Ice and Fire came out and I revisited some older stories or some older television shows, I really realized that they came from George. So that has piqued my interest to a weird level. And evaluating his body of work as a whole. That's what Martinworld is. That's what, wherever it is, that's what I have back here is all of George's work. So what is Martinworld? Like I just said, it's the entire bibliography of George R.R. Martin, beginning with his published work in the 60s, but not just that. It also includes the SSMs, or So Spake Martins, as well as any other interview that's out there, written or video or even radio. He has a couple of radio interviews that are worth seeking out and taking a listen. But also especially the autobiography sections of his two Dream Songs, or one, depending on which version you have, Dream Songs anthologies. Those are very important. You learn just as much, if not more, from taking peeks into George's own personal life that he decides to share than you do from the stories that he writes. So at this point, I would like to add that not just those items are part of Martinworld, but so are his other outside influences. They're always orbiting Martinworld literary space. So it's things like Jack Vance and Heinlein and Roger Zelazny and Shakespeare and poetry, and comics, a myriad of things. He's writing for himself. His magnum opus is the greatest and most epic story he would want to read. So the larger concept of Martinworld should be thought of as a constellation of stories rather than a straight line. So the constellation, that lots of little things that are connected to create a bigger picture. So since some here watching this might be wondering, saying that this comes up every once in a while, and I'm only going to spend a second on it because I have another video about this. But no, Song of Ice and Fire is not secretly hidden in George's Thousand Worlds universe, nor is it secretly sci-fi. It's not secretly in the Thousand Worlds universe because all of the story elements from Thousand Worlds and everything else is in A Song of Ice and Fire. So it would be redundant to have, Star Lady from this rock written in the same universe as Arya and Braavos, which that's essentially what a huge building block for what Braavos is comes from his story Star Lady. Million other examples, 1,001 other examples, you could say. He's stated over and over again that A Song of Ice and Fire is fantasy and it's not in 1,000 Worlds. And that's all I'm going to say about it right now. So does George even repurpose his own work? I mean, come on. What author does that? Who in the world even uses an author to evaluate more works from the same author. That seems kind of weird, Leech. What are you doing? Well, yes, the front page of my blog, I have many quotes, not all of them, but many quotes from George, where he says he feels free to reuse his own work. He comes up with these ideas. He likes them. He will use them or not use them, but he will always save them and always draw upon them again if he needs to. That's why characters in Ice and Fire like Bloodraven and Val, they're not new to Song of Ice and Fire. They've actually been around for a long time. That's a different video, though. Which brings me to one of my favorite quotes by George. He says, Larendor was published in 1976, Bitter Blooms in 1977, and The Lost Lands in 1982. Old work, certainly, but I was always fond of those three stories and of the three women who starred as the protagonists, Shara, Grey Alice, and Shaun of Carenhall. None of the stories had anything to do with the Song of Ice and Fire, of course, nor even with each other, but a careful reader can find hints and shadows and seeds of many of the ideas that would later bloom in Westeros in each of them. Still, even so, they remained obscure, known only to a few, meaning those stories. Those stories and many more can be found on my reread page on my blog. George has at least 80 stories that are available. So if you have either of or both of the Dream Songs, that is only about maybe slightly less than 40% of his printed work. Those anthologies are a great start, but don't stop there. There are many stories that are still out there to be found, and I have them. I'm transcribing them, and we can discuss them. So why choose Martinworld style analysis? I mean, come on, Leech. We can go to school to figure out how everybody analyzes literature all the time. Why is this so important? Surely you're just making this up. No, my friends. What Martinworld does is it very specifically looks for George's own styles and patterns, which can be, deduced to what is his authorial intent. It asks why this author is writing this. Is this a story that is dying to be told? Or is it to persuade the reader of current events? Or is it because the author needs money? In George's world, in his Martinworld history, it's a little of each. And then we still see that come back into play with the Song of Ice and Fire. People have asked if I find George's use of repurposing his story devices predictable or boring. No, I shout, no. It's more like mega foreshadowing. If you know his history, if you see the repeating patterns, not just in archetypes, but not just in plot devices, but in plot progression, in archetype or character progression, what they go through, the choices, the difference in the choices they make at the beginning of the story towards the end of the story, it leaves you wanting a lot more because it's so interesting and engaging in the first place that you need more. You need to keep feeding yourself this. A great example, a story that I can recommend, which I don't have transcribed yet, but I will soon, is Weekend in a War Zone. If you want to see a great story of his that shows archetype progression that some people may or may not like by the time we get to the end of A Song of Ice and Fire, that's one of the stories I recommend often. Also, using a Martinworld style analysis, it helps a reader avoid making extreme assumptions in order to promote their forced perspective. Yes, I'm talking about when people do the uber stan fan thing of a particular character and nothing else compares to this character and everything serves this character, and that's not how he writes. basically it avoids crackpot. Don't get me wrong. I love crackpot. I love great crackpot. But I like crackpot that's really based on something that's plausible, because then it's just like ooey gooey deliciousness and you just want to sink into it more just to have fun. So some of his, we know a lot of this by now, but some of his repeating themes across all of his works that are a little bit more specific to George, is the magic versus science or realism, and global climate crisis. He's admittedly been writing about this theme or incorporating it into his books, his stories, since the 1970s. Tough Voyaging is the main one that he developed, where he wanted to just put it straight out there that this is tough. This is what the groundwork for tough is about. Moral inexactness is another one, or questioning interpretations. There's always the left, the right, and the middle. Like, where's the truth in this? Sexuality. He is one of the few authors, especially in his earlier decades work, that if he has a character that is not a typical normal gender and sexual, with sexual preferences, he whatever that spectrum might be, he writes it in. He puts it in. He has guys that are married to guys. He's got women with women. It doesn't matter. He has people with alien, what would be inhuman or aliens to us. Even interbreeding. He has humans that have started off as one, that have evolved into two different forms, that have, for the sake of literally all life kind, have to re-merge back together and start mating back together. It's the one thing out of all 80 of his stories, incest is in, or implied incest, whether it's real incest or just implied in certain ways. Incest is never the winner, ever. It brings down the downfall of a dynasty every time. I'm sorry for any shippers out there, but I have a blog page in this that explains why, with lots of book quotes and George quotes. Choices that make us who we are in the end. There's the quote in the line in A Song of Ice and Fire that in the end we're all just stories if we're lucky. That is a phrase that he's been reworking over and over again with many of his stories across his writing career. We're all just stories in the end if we're lucky. So the story that is told, the story that is sung by the singers meaning either somebody like some bard walking around, or a singer like a history keeper in the Weirwoods, whichever play on words you want to go with. The singers tell us, they're the ones that put it out there for us. We are the result of the choices we make along the way. So, and then another theme, which this is a pretty commonly discussed one, is religion and faith versus zealotry. Anything that brings an extremism. Zealotry is an extremist way of going about any choice or decision that you make, which goes into another common theme of his, which is slavery, both mental and physical or bodily slavery. They are both included in many of his stories. It's not about the United States South, the history that we have both in the United States and globally with slaves, with holding them bodily. It's a lot more than that. Has made statements before that his books are not allegory for what's happening in this world. So he's not trying to correct anything. He's using that as influence for certain world building foundations, but he's not trying to overcompensate or correct anything that has happened. So his influences noted by him, which can be found across the interwebs, in spoken and written interviews, as well as his dream songs anthologies, includes things that have impacted him personally, like playing with turtles as a child, playing under the huge gnarly trees in Bayonne as a child. I have a blog page where I talk about going up to New Jersey for Fire and Blood, and I actually I got up there early. He's made it known publicly, like exactly where he grew up, even listing the street names. And I happened to be able to go right there. And I parked and I spent some time on the streets where he grew up, and in the park where he played in, and on the river that was right in front of his building, and looking at New York City and the docks, the Brady docks. These are all things that have influenced him, that he has written into many of his stories over and over again, not just the Song of Ice and Fire. So this brings us back to, this constellation idea again. All of these little stars form one big, larger picture. And it's out there for everybody to see. You just have to know which stars to look for. So this brings me to another very favorite quote of mine from George. He says, "In A Song of Ice and Fire, I take stuff from War of the Roses and other fantasy things. All of these things work around in my head, and somehow they gel into what I hope is uniquely my own. The uniquely my own part is very important." Yes, sure, he is pulling from Arthurian legend. No doubt about it. But as he said in interviews before, he's inspired by them. He's not copying them fully one for one, because we already know the endings to those stories. That is not what he's doing. He's pulling all of these from all of these sources, and he's creating something that is uniquely his own. That's why we need Martinworld style analysis. So part of the reason why I'm here in general is to encourage people to read these stories, encourage these, all of you readers out there to not just read the stories, but engage with other people. Let's chat about it. Let's have some thoughtful discussions on what's going on in his world. This is what we can do while we wait for the winds of winter, while we wait for a dream of spring, is in addition to reading new books and other books by other authors and getting out there and doing other things. If you keep yourself engaged with George's style of writing, things in the winds of winter and going forward are going to make so much more sense. It's sort of like the stars, it helps navigate. So in addition to that, I just want to say and make clear that anything that I ever say or any other theorist ever says, none of that is 100% correct. We are all just going by the same information that's available to everybody when we come up with any sort of like theories or ask questions or throw some ideas out there. So don't be shy interacting with anybody. George's canon is the only canon, not mine, not any other theorists out there. I just report and try my hardest to encourage you to read George R. R. Martin. I stand by this statement. I swear it's universal fact in like the most meta way. Is the only person that really knows the truth about A Song of Ice and Fire is Paris. Paris, that's it. So I want to leave you with a quote from George that he made way back in 2012. He's asked by an interviewer, "You know that the ending won't please everyone, don't you?" And he responds, "Of course I will disappoint some of my fans because they are making theories about who will finally take the throne, who will live, who will die, and they even imagine romantic pairings. But I have already experienced that phenomenon with A Feast for Crows, and again with Dance with Dragons. Repeating the words of Rick Nelson, you can't please anyone, so you've got to please yourself. So I will write the last 2 books as good as I am capable of, and I think the great majority of my readers would be happy with it. Trying to please everyone is a horrible mistake. I don't say you should annoy your readers, but art isn't a democracy and should never be a democracy. It's my story, and those people who get annoyed should go out and write their own stories they want to read. And on that note, thank you for following along with the jambles and jumbles of the Fattest Leech of Ice and Fire. Bye, Gumbo.